What do you mean by radical left? People on the radical left are saying things that are not truthful. What do you mean by the radical left?
Senator, I am unsure from where you're pulling that phrase. I don't have the context to answer, Senator.
Yes or no?
Senator, you're asking a question that implicates a current issue, and under the canons of judicial conduct, I should not and cannot answer.
Do you think that all the members of the United States Supreme Court share your perspective and your view on originalism?
Senator,
Yes or no?
Senator, I understand the justices on the Supreme Court hold different views on the method of interpreting the Constitution.
So not all of them hold your view that originalism is...
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to America First, Patriots. Today we're diving deep into a Senate judicial nomination hearing featuring Senator Mazie Hirono's questioning of nominee Mr. Tong that perfectly encapsulates everything that's wrong with the confirmation process in Washington, D.C. But before we get into this absolute masterclass in judicial activism disguised as questioning, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're growing every single day because Americans are waking up to the truth about what's happening in our judicial system. And if you want to support real patriotic content that cuts through the mainstream media nonsense, head over to patreon.com/AmericaFirst and support us for as low as $5 a month. Every dollar helps us bring you the unfiltered truth that the establishment doesn't want you to hear. Now let's talk about what we just witnessed in this hearing between Senator Mazie Hirono and Mr. Tong. What we're seeing here is a perfect example of how radical leftist senators like Hirono are trying to weaponize the judicial confirmation process to push their woke agenda and eliminate constitutional originalism from our federal courts. This isn't about qualifications or judicial temperament. This is about ideological warfare, plain and simple.
Ask the following two initial questions of all nominees to ensure the fitness of the nominees to serve. So I'll start with Mr. Dunlap and then Mr. Tong. Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
No.
Have you ever faced discipline or enter into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
No.
Can't hear you.
No, Senator.
So, Mr. Tong, you have been asked questions about originalism, and you are an originalist, correct? You have written about it, the importance of originalism.
Senator, I subscribe to originalism, but I would be bound by Supreme Court precedent.
Well, sometimes there is no Supreme Court precedent. So let me just mention that pretty recently in March, this past March, you wrote, quote, "In my view, there is no real rival to originalism when it comes to the proper method of interpretation." And you noted at the same time that, I'm quoting you, "Originalism recognizes that there may be hard cases, but most cases, including the high-profile ones, are not hard, whether there's a constitutional right to abortion, same-sex marriage, sodomy, pornography, transgender protections. The answer for the originalist is simple: no." Do you think that all the members of the United States Supreme Court share your perspective and your view on originalism?
Senator,
Yes or no?
Senator, I understand the justices on the Supreme Court hold different views on the method of interpreting the Constitution.
So not all of them hold your view that originalism is like no real rival to how things should be interpreted. So, Mr. Tong, as a lawyer and prospective judge, do you believe that court orders must be followed by parties to a court unless and until they are ordered by overturned by an appellate court? Again, yes or no? Should court orders be followed?
As a general matter, Senator, court orders should be followed by the parties that are bound to it.
Well, I don't know what the general matter is. You know, you should. I would think that court orders should be followed. So, do you believe that someone who contemplates disregarding court orders is qualified to get a lifetime job as a judge? Yes or no?
Senator, you're asking a question that implicates a current issue, and under the canons of judicial conduct, I should not and cannot answer.
Well, you know what? There should be judicial conduct that says all judges should believe that judicial orders should be followed. So you know that this is a matter of concern to quite a number of us on this panel. So you were asked various questions about your views on the role of women and that women can do certain things better than men, and I take it that you believe men can do certain things better than women. And the fact that you may have held these views 20 years ago doesn't mean that you no longer hold those views, because I held certain views when I was in college, such as public service is a good thing. I still hold that view. But yet, when you were asked whether you still believe in these gender roles, which are very limiting, frankly, in my view, you said that the canons of ethics prohibits you from answering. So do you, I mean, that's like, this is going to be a live question. Should you become a judge in the Ninth Circuit? Do you actually think that there could be a live question on whether or not a woman's gender role is going to come before you?
Senator, questions relating to, for instance, the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause could come before me, and for that reason, I consider that a live issue, and I wouldn't be able to answer under the
Okay,
canons.
well, you know what? We didn't talk about the 14th Amendment, which, by the way, as far as I'm concerned, is supposed to provide equal protection for everyone, regardless of race, religion, et But frankly, what is happening with the 14th Amendment is that it is being weaponized, in my view, that this is a Supreme Court majority that is not exactly holding the 14th Amendment to provide equal protection for everyone. So I just have one more question. You talked about what you call the radical left. What do you mean by radical left? People on the radical left are saying things that are not truthful. What do you mean by the radical left?
Senator, I am unsure from where you're pulling that phrase. I don't have the context to answer, Senator.
You do remember talking about what you consider to be radical left. Mr. Chairman, I hope that I can submit some questions for the record, and it's so disturbing to me that there are some of our nominees who think that they don't have to really respond. I hope that you are not among those, because I will have some questions for the record. Mr. Tong?
Appreciate it, Senator.
Okay, thank you.
First, let's address the elephant in the room. The opening questions about sexual harassment are nothing more than political theater designed to create soundbites and gotcha moments. While these questions might seem reasonable on the surface, they're actually part of a broader strategy to intimidate conservative nominees and create an atmosphere of guilt by association. The fact that both nominees answered appropriately, with clear denials, should have been the end of it, but notice how quickly the questioning pivoted to ideological litmus tests. The real meat of this hearing comes when Senator Hirono starts grilling Mr. Tong about originalism. And let me tell you something, Patriots, this is where we see the true colors of Hirono and the radical left. They're terrified of originalism because it means judges actually have to follow the Constitution as written, not as they wish it was written. When Mr. Tong states that he subscribes to originalism but would be bound by Supreme Court precedent, he's giving the exact answer that any qualified judicial nominee should give. He's demonstrating both constitutional fidelity and respect for the rule of law. But notice how Senator Hirono immediately tries to trap him by asking about cases where there's no Supreme Court precedent. This is a classic leftist tactic from Hirono's playbook, trying to get nominees to pre-commit to specific outcomes on cases that might come before them. Any lawyer worth their salt knows you can't do that, and Mr. Tong handled it perfectly by staying within ethical bounds. Now let's talk about that March statement where Tong wrote that there's no real rival to originalism when it comes to proper constitutional interpretation. Patriots, this is exactly the kind of judicial philosophy we need on our federal courts. The Constitution means what it says, not what activist judges want it to mean. When he states that most cases, including high-profile ones, are not hard cases for originalists, He's absolutely right. The Constitution provides clear guidance when we actually follow its text and original meaning. Senator Hirono's reaction to Tong's views on constitutional rights is particularly telling. When Tong wrote that originalism provides simple answers about rights to abortion, same-sex marriage, sodomy, pornography, and transgender protections, saying the answer is no, he was simply stating what the Constitution actually says versus what activist courts have read into it. This isn't about personal animus toward any group. This is about judicial restraint and constitutional fidelity. The Constitution doesn't grant unlimited rights that aren't specifically enumerated or clearly implied by its text. That's not controversial, that's basic constitutional law. But the radical left, led by senators like Hirono, has become so accustomed to using the courts to implement their social agenda that they view any return to constitutional governance as an existential threat. The questioning about court orders is another perfect example of how these hearings have devolved into political theater under Hirono's approach. When asked if court orders must be followed, Tong gave the correct legal answer that court orders should generally be followed by parties bound by them. But Senator Hirono wasn't satisfied with this legally accurate response because it wasn't the sound bite she wanted. She wanted Tong to make some broad, unqualified statement that could later be used against him or twisted to serve their political narrative. The follow-up question about whether someone who contemplates disregarding court orders is qualified to be a judge is clearly designed to create a gotcha moment. Tong properly invoked judicial conduct canons to avoid answering what is obviously a question about current political controversies. This shows exactly the kind of judicial temperament we want: ethical reasoning over political grandstanding. But here's where it gets really interesting, Patriots. Senator Hirono then complains that judicial conduct should require all judges to believe court orders should be followed. Well, of course they should, and there's nothing in Tong's responses suggesting otherwise. This is manufactured outrage from Hirono designed to create the impression of impropriety where none exists. The gender roles questioning reveals another dimension of this ideological witch hunt by Senator Hirono. Hirono references previous questions about views on what women and men can do better, suggesting these are limiting views. But here's the reality. Patriots' biological differences between men and women are scientific fact, not social construction. Acknowledging that men and women have different strengths and capabilities isn't discrimination, it's reality. The idea that recognizing complementary gender roles is somehow disqualifying for judicial service shows how far senators like Hirono have moved from mainstream American values. When Tong properly refuses to answer these questions by citing potential 14th Amendment equal protection cases that might come before him, he's again demonstrating proper judicial ethics. But Senator Hirono's frustration reveals her true agenda. She wants nominees who will pre-commit to her ideological positions rather than judges who will follow the law. Senator Hirono's rant about the 14th Amendment being weaponized by the Supreme Court majority is particularly rich. The 14th Amendment does provide equal protection under the law, but that doesn't mean it requires the specific policy outcomes that Hirono and the radical left desires. Equal protection means treating people equally under existing law, not creating new rights or special protections for favored groups. The current Supreme Court majority is actually returning the 14th Amendment to its original meaning rather than allowing it to be used as a vehicle for judicial legislation. The radical left questioning at the end is almost comical. When pressed about references to the radical left, Tong claims uncertainty about the context. Whether this was strategic evasion or genuine confusion, it highlights how the radical left has become so mainstream in democratic politics that they're sensitive about being called radical even when their positions are objectively extreme by historical American standards. What we're witnessing in this hearing between Senator Hirono and Mr. Tong is nothing less than an assault on constitutional governance and the rule of law. The radical left, exemplified by Hirono's questioning, wants judges who will implement their policy agenda from the bench rather than judges who will faithfully interpret and apply the Constitution. They're not interested in judicial qualifications or temperament, they want ideological compliance. This is why judicial nominations have become so contentious in recent decades. When courts stop being neutral arbiters of law and become super legislatures implementing political agendas, every nomination becomes a battle for the soul of the country. Senators like Hirono understand this, which is why they're so desperate to prevent originalist judges from being confirmed. But here's what gives me hope, Patriots. Nominees like Mr. Tong, who demonstrate constitutional fidelity and judicial restraint, represent a return to the proper role of courts in our constitutional system. When judges interpret the Constitution according to its original meaning rather than their personal policy preferences, they restore power to the American people acting through their elected representatives. This is what the founders intended. They created a system where difficult social and political questions would be resolved through democratic processes, not judicial decree. When activist courts short-circuit democracy by imposing their preferred outcomes, they undermine the very foundation of our republic. The questions in this hearing also reveal the intellectual bankruptcy of Senator Hirono's approach to constitutional interpretation. She can't defend her judicial philosophy on its merits, so she resorts to personal attacks and gotcha questions. She can't explain why her preferred outcomes should override constitutional text and original meaning, so she attacks originalism itself as somehow illegitimate. But originalism isn't a conservative plot, it's simply the idea that legal texts mean what they say, and that constitutional interpretation should be based on the text's original public meaning rather than evolving contemporary values. This is how we interpret every other legal document, from contracts to statutes. The Constitution should be no different. The alternative to originalism is judicial supremacy, where unelected judges impose their personal views on the entire country. This is fundamentally anti-democratic and contrary to our constitutional structure. It's also unstable because it makes constitutional meaning dependent on the personal views of whoever happens to be on the court at any given time. Patriots, what we need to understand is that this hearing represents a much larger battle for the future of American governance. Will we have judges who faithfully interpret and apply the law as written, or will we have activist judges who impose their policy preferences regardless of constitutional text and democratic will? The stakes couldn't be higher. Every aspect of American life, from religious liberty to free speech, from economic freedom to family autonomy, is affected by how our courts approach constitutional interpretation. When judges act as superlegislators, they steal power from the American people and vest it in an unaccountable judicial elite. This is why we must support nominees who demonstrate constitutional fidelity and reject those who view the Constitution as a living document that can be reshaped to fit contemporary political preferences. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, not a suggestion that can be ignored when it becomes inconvenient. The behavior of senators like Hirono in this hearing also demonstrates why we need term limits for Congress and why judicial confirmation reform is so urgently needed. When senators use confirmation hearings as platforms for political grandstanding rather than serious evaluation of judicial qualifications, they undermine the entire process and erode public confidence in our institutions. We need senators who will ask serious questions about judicial philosophy and constitutional interpretation, not politicians who are more interested in creating viral moments for social media. The American people deserve better from their elected representatives, and our judicial nominees deserve fair and substantive evaluation rather than ideological persecution. Moving forward, Patriots, we must remain vigilant about judicial nominations at all levels. The federal courts have enormous power over American life, and we cannot allow them to be packed with activist judges who view the Constitution as an obstacle to their policy agenda rather than the supreme law they've sworn to uphold. This means staying informed about nominees, contacting our senators to express our views, and supporting organizations that fight for constitutional governance. We must also support media outlets and content creators who are willing to tell the truth about what's happening in our judicial system rather than simply parroting establishment talking points. The hearing we've just analyzed, featuring Senator Hirono's questioning of Mr. Tong, is a perfect case study in how the radical left operates. They can't win on the merits, so they rely on intimidation, character assassination, and procedural manipulation to advance their agenda. But when we shine a light on their tactics and expose their true goals, the American people can see through their deception. Remember, Patriots, the Constitution belongs to we the people, not to activist judges or radical politicians. Our system of government depends on having judges who will faithfully interpret and apply the law rather than imposing their personal political preferences. This is what separates a republic governed by law from a tyranny governed by the whims of those in power. That's all for today's episode of America First. If this analysis opened your eyes to what's really happening in our judicial confirmation process, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to support us on Patreon at patreon.com/America First for as low as $5 a month. Your support helps us continue bringing you the unfiltered truth about the battles being fought for America's future. Until next time, keep fighting for constitutional governance and the rule of law. America First, Patriots.